This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to China Global Television Network. This is The World Today. I'm Hannah Viviers in Nairobi. Here are your top stories. Chinese President Xi Jinping warns against a return to Cold War tensions in the Asia-Pacific region. China and the U.S. agree to do more to fight climate change. We have details from the climate summit in Glasgow. And the migrant crisis on the Poland-Belarus border is deepening as thousands face worsening conditions. Well, China's President Xi Jinping says the Asia-Pacific region is facing a once-in-a-century test that is crucial to the future of humanity. Addressing an online APEC summit, Xi urged members to face today's challenges such as COVID and climate change while calling for more cooperation and inclusiveness. Owen Poland reports.
Supporting indigenous populations is a key theme of APEC 2021, and China's president says APEC economies need to be forward-looking and reject practices of discrimination and exclusion.
Attempts to draw ideological lines or form small circles on geopolitical grounds are bound to fail. The Asia-Pacific region cannot and should not relapse into the confrontation and division of the Cold War era.
New Zealand's Prime Minister also believes that the Asia-Pacific region can build back better and emerge from the COVID pandemic stronger and more resilient than ever.
Now, every crisis does present an opportunity, and the 21 APEC economies have been dealt a heavy burden, but also an opportunity to strike an economic reset on a scale we haven't seen since World War II.
Ardern says that APEC has also shown a determination to work together and to reject protectionism.
This year, all APEC economies have worked to make trade easier as we battle the pandemic.
APEC fully supports moves toward a more digital economy, especially when it comes to cross-border customs procedures. But Australia's Prime Minister wants tougher rules to prevent hacking, terrorist activities and cyberbullying on social media platforms.
And we can't have digital platforms providing a shield for people to engage in online abuse, because if we allow that to happen, digital platforms will not be a safe space for consumers, for our children.
But one of the biggest issues at this online summit is climate change, and China has pledged to lead the world in becoming carbon neutral before 2030.
China will strike a balance between low-carbon transition and ensuring the living needs of its people, and between development and carbon reduction, and will achieve carbon peak and carbon neutrality within the time frame we set.
As the host of APEC 2021, New Zealand also says that governments must send the right signals to businesses and consumers to discourage the inefficient use of fossil fuels.
Why on earth are governments subsidising fossil fuel use to the tune of some $500 billion every year? I'm pleased that APEC is turning the tide on these subsidies by taking concrete steps to tackle them.
And APEC leaders will meet again virtually at their leaders' retreat this weekend. Owen Poland, CGTN, Auckland.
Well, China and the United States have issued a surprise joint statement at the COP26 summit, agreeing to do more to fight climate change. It aims to cut methane emissions, protect forests, and phase out coal. Let's now cross over to Philip Crowther, who is in Glasgow. Philip, hi there. Tell us more about this agreement.
Yeah, a bit of a surprise agreement, wasn't it? In general terms, both the United States and China deciding to increase cooperation and to speed up their actions to curb emissions. Now, when it comes to these specifics, maybe we'll start with this one that other countries here will be particularly interested in. China says it will make best efforts to accelerate a reduction of coal consumption in the second half of this decade. Now, that is something that a lot of countries here are looking at closely, for the likes of China and India, biggest coal consumers in the world, to reduce their dependence on oil as quickly as possible. There are more concrete announcements in this deal between the United States and China. One on methane, on reducing methane gas leaks, and maybe more importantly, something that you don't hear very often at all, the United States and China deciding to share technology. They're only in this area still. That's pretty significant, isn't it? And also both countries promising that they will have new national goals to curb greenhouse gas emissions for the year 2035, and they will have those goals ready by the year 2025. That also seen as a major breakthrough. Now let's listen to those who largely brokered this deal. US Special Envoy John Kerry, but first China's chief negotiator Xi Jinping.
In the area of climate change, there is more agreement between China and the US than divergence, making it an area with huge potential for cooperation. We're 2 days away from the end of the Glasgow COP, so we hope this joint declaration can make a China-US contribution to the success of COP26.
It commits to a series of important actions, not in the long term, not way out in the future, but now during this decade when it's needed. And I'm pleased to announce that we will work together to limit methane. Methane emissions, a greenhouse gas up to 80 times more destructive, more potent than CO2.
What you saw there, those two men spoke separately, but this is very much a joint declaration by the United States and China, not all too dissimilar to one that was made in the year 2014, that is seen as one that was crucial to bringing about the Paris Climate Agreement in the year 2015. That climate agreement is, of course, the one that this Glasgow Climate Conference is now building on. Now, an agreement between the United States and China does things for those two countries, but it also adds momentum to the talks that are happening right now, the negotiations, so that these almost 200 countries can come to an agreement by the end of Friday. In that sense, a very, very important move indeed by the United States and China, and one that is seen very positively indeed by delegates here, but also by experts.
Thank you so much for all that, Philip Crowther speaking to us from Glasgow. Well, phasing out fossil fuels is one of the key demands of this year's COP26 climate change conference. But this is a challenge for South Africa, the world's 7th largest producer and consumer of coal. In this installment of Panorama Africa, CGTN visits the country to explore the impact of coal-fired power and the potential of China-Africa cooperation in renewable energy.
The city of Emalahleni, meaning place of coal, is the heart of South Africa's coal mining sector. Situated in Mpumalanga province, it holds the largest concentration of coal mines and coal power plants in the country. Each year, new mines open up, bringing them closer and closer to where low-income communities live.
Every day uvuka kune-dust. Kusho ukuthi vele siphefumula yona, sidla yona, vele sesiphila yona. If ungacheka manje abantwana bethu, amehlo abo sewabovu kabuhlungu kwangathi abantu abadala ababhemayo abaphuzayo. Iyaba-affecta kakhulu lento le.
The implementation of environmental regulations and the rehabilitation of coal fields has been inconsistent, causing many serious problems to the ecosystem. Africa's biggest carbon emitter of greenhouse gases is feeling the pressure to retire its aging fleet of coal-fired power stations and seize investments in new coal projects.
We cannot disguise the fact that Eskom is in fact a very large emitter, not only of carbon, but also of sulfur dioxide, nitrous oxide, as well as particulate matter. And we therefore have a duty to clean up the environment.
An announcement earlier this year from Chinese President Xi Jinping may help propel South Africa's efforts.
China will step up support for other developing countries in developing green and low-carbon energy, and will not build new coal-fired power projects abroad.
In South Africa's Western Cape province, a unique partnership between South African firm BTE Renewables and Chinese firm Goldwinds highlights the potential of China-Africa cooperation in the renewable energy sector. Barely a year old, the Excelsior wind farm in Swellendam is contributing clean energy directly into Eskom's national grid.
2020 December, we begin to producing. We calculate we have benefit around 20,000 families per year. So that is very promising.
The Excelsior wind farm hopes to be a positive addition to this community, providing power as well as jobs and social development. Coal has been a critical commodity in Africa, but its benefits are far outweighed by the cost to the environment and communities. But through key partnerships and with the abundant supply of wind and sun, Africa is uniquely positioned to transition to renewable energy, bringing power and progress to Africa for a clean and resilient future. Lindy Mtongana, CGTN, South Africa.
Well, a migrant crisis is deepening on the border of Poland and Belarus. Thousands remain in limbo in dire conditions. Poland says responsibility rests with Russia. Linda Kennedy has more.
There are about 2,000 migrants who are on the Polish border, according to reports this morning. And what has also happened is that there is an increase of activity on Belarus's border with Lithuania. At midnight last night, local time, Lithuania also declared a state of emergency, and it will permit their border guards, their parliament says, to use proportional physical force to repel any migrants. At the same time as all of that is actually happening at the frontiers with Belarus in the EU, this is being discussed, and we're hearing that they are close to announcing new sanctions, which would be on a total of 30 people and entities, including the foreign minister and Belarus's national airline. And the EU were not pulling any punches yesterday. One of their spokespeople referred to the regime in Belarus as a gangster regime. The Polish Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki yesterday was talking about Belarus using people as human shields and accusing Russia of being the mastermind of all of this. And in retaliation, the EU was saying that Minsk was using people and luring them and setting a dangerous trap. This all harks back to, most recently, elections in 2020 in Belarus, which opponents say President Alexander Lukashenko rigged in order to win. After that, there was the biggest anti-governmental protest since he came to power in 1994, and that prompted a crackdown from Lukashenko. The EU then applied a lot of sanctions, including asset freezing and travel bans on 166 people and 15 entities. And the sort of restrictions included a ban on selling internet interception equipment, and that the national airline could not enter EU airspace. Those sanctions haven't worked, so where is this all going to go from here? I guess we're going to hear if there's any tougher ideas coming out of the EU later today.
Well, that's it for this edition of The World Today. We'll be back shortly with Africa Live.
This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Boeing agrees to a deal with victims of the 2019 Ethiopia Airlines plane crash. Sudan civilian leaders reject negotiations with the military. And we look at the impact of coal-fired power in South Africa and efforts to fight climate change. Hello and welcome. You're watching Africa Live. We're coming to live from Nairobi. I'm Hannah Viviers. Here are more stories making headlines. In business, Uganda fish exporters lose over $6 million as stocks steadily decline. And in sport, Kenya arrive in Kampala ahead of the 2022 FIFA World Cup qualifier match against Uganda. Well, Boeing has reached an agreement with the families of victims of the 2019 Ethiopian Airlines crash. According to a court filing, Boeing is accepting liability for the deaths. In 2019, a Boeing 737 MAX crashed in Ethiopia, killing all 157 people on board. At the time of the crash, the 737 MAX was Boeing's best-selling plane. Lawyers for the victims' families noted that Boeing, under the agreement, admitted that the 737 MAX had unsafe conditions. As part of the agreement, lawyers for the victims' families can claim compensation in the U.S. courts, but will not seek punitive damages. A hearing on the agreement is set to take place next Tuesday. Well, for more on this, we're joined by Coletta Wanjohi, who is in Ethiopia's capital, Addis Ababa. Hi, Coletta. How is this deal being received by families of victims of the plane crash?
Well, I believe for many families it will be a step closer towards closure in terms of their loss, and probably a step closer towards putting this whole legal battle to an end. We know that Boeing had settled with some few families before the majority went to court again. So yes, the majority will be looking at what the compensation is looking like. Probably the biggest challenge would be the families from African countries. For example, in Kenya was highly affected. Then we had some from Ethiopia and other African countries. We don't know how easy it will be for them to make the claims, considering that this will be done under a U.S. court. But all in all, it is probably something that will open up for more discussions and more output in terms of from the families, especially in the course of the day, as we see how the details of the compensation will turn out.
Coletta, as we've been following this story, we know that Boeing had previously been deflecting blame elsewhere by, for instance, questioning the abilities of the pilots, but it has now accepted responsibility for the crash. How are investigators and Ethiopia Airlines in particular reacting to this deal?
Well, we are yet to get an official statement from Ethiopian Airlines. However, we know that earlier Ethiopian Airlines had already said that it had settled out of court with Boeing, and it had said that it's ready to move forward because Boeing has been one of its main suppliers in terms of aircrafts. And we know it had grounded 4, apart from the one that got the accident. 4 had been grounded since 2019 up to now, and the CEO hinted in around September that they would be able to put back the planes on air probably early next year. On the other side, we know that on the issue, the Ethiopian Airlines also announced that it has signed a memorandum of agreement that was in August with Boeing to ensure that it helps it develop into a more developed hub for Africa in terms of aviation. This means they will engage in issues of aviation, more advanced aviation training, industrial development, and others. So yes, it is also a relief for Ethiopian Airlines on the fact that it gives them hope for people to believe that their pilots and their staff did not have anything to do with the accident.
Thank you so much for all that. Coletta Wanjohi speaking to us from Ethiopia's capital, Addis Ababa. Let's head over to Sudan now, where main civilian political coalition has rejected any negotiations with the military. The Forces of Freedom and Change coalition says that it supports ousted Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok and is demanding a return to pre-coup conditions. Mediation attempts since the military takeover have stalled. Neither a cabinet or head of state have been named. Sudanese military leader General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan however, says that he is committed to democratic transition and elections set for July of 2023.
We stress that we will not meet with the military. Our position is unequivocally clear. There will be no negotiations and no compromise with the undertakers of the coup. We commend the firm position of the Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok.
Well, CGTN's Nawam Muhyiddin now joins us on the program via phone from Sudan's capital, Khartoum. Hi, Naba. The civilian coalition ruling out negotiations with military leaders. How is this news being received by the military?
Yes, actually, there is no official comment from the military general reacting to what the FFA said. But it added more uncertainty to the scene, especially that some mediators and internal initiatives reported that the initiative between civilians and generals reached to a deadlock. There is no official reaction, but there is complexity in the scene. Also, there is a new delegation from South Sudan is expected to make a new round to make a breakthrough in the political scene in Sudan.
Now, but the junta had previously said that it would allow civilian leaders back in office and even raised the possibility of having ousted Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok back in government. How does this latest development affect the transition back to civilian leadership?
Yes, actually, there is growing culture among pro-democracy groups and FSC, which is Freedom and Change Forces, the political umbrella that backed the protest against al-Bashir. Growing calls to have the Prime Minister back and also international pressures to have him back to his office. But there is some reports said that Abdullah Hamdok is not in a good health right now, and with the mediation efforts reaching a deadlock, it seems like we will see more fragile situation in the upcoming days because the military generals cannot appoint now a new government in a unilateral way because some countries have warned against this. So maybe we'll see like more fragile situation with the mediation efforts reaching a deadlock, with everybody is clinging to his opinions and to what they think, like the military generals. They just want to form the government, whether with Hamdok or not, but the street is rejecting this, and FSC, Freedom and Change Forces, is rejecting it. So, yeah, I think there is a few weeks to come to see a change in the political scene in Sudan.
Thank you so much for that update, Naba. Naba Muhyiddin speaking to us from Sudan's capital, Khartoum. Well, let's turn back to Ethiopia, where the U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken has urged both sides of the conflict in the Tigray region to hold talks. Blinken says that he believes that all sides see the danger in perpetuating the conflict. He added that he hoped that stakeholders would produce a ceasefire and over time negotiate a durable political resolution. Fighting in Ethiopia has escalated, with the TPLF joining a coalition of 8 other anti-government groups. The coalition claims to be advancing towards the capital, Addis Ababa. The government recently imposed a state of emergency and has arrested dozens in security swoops. They include 16 UN local staff members and their dependents, as well as over 70 drivers working with the World Food Program. Let's head over to the DRC, where 2 lawmakers from the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo have released a report that documents the deaths of more than 7,000 civilians in the hands of armed groups from 2008 to 2021. The report says that there's been an increase in the killing of civilians in the country's Ituri and North Kivu provinces, despite a state of siege imposed by the government earlier this year. CGTN's Chris Ochambringa has the details from the DRC's capital, Kinshasa.
The report, titled Yotama, highlights the killing of civilians by armed groups in the east of the DRC. It was written by researchers from civil society organizations and 2 MPs from the conflict-prone areas of North Kivu province. It has documented more than 7,000 civilian deaths that occurred between 2008 and 2021. The MPs are now calling for an international tribunal to investigate the killings.
We are launching an appeal for an independent investigation into the killings in the east of our country. It should be carried out by an international court to find out who is behind the killings.
In May this year, Congolese authorities declared martial law in Ituri and North Kivu province in an attempt to stop the attacks against civilians. But the attacks have continued.
Les 5 mois avant la proclamation de l'état de siège, on a enregistré.
We recorded 503 deaths by gunmen in our region 5 months before the government declared the state of siege. But what's strange is that killings increased to more than 1,300 after the declaration, which led to a bigger deployment of government troops. That makes us wonder whether that state of siege is of any benefit to our people.
A Congolese analyst believes cases of poor discipline within the army are partly to blame for the increase in attacks against civilians.
There is an aspect of impunity in our army that the government should deal with decisively. There are some officers who have been embezzling money meant for ending the conflict in the east. Fortunately, some have already been arrested.
Congolese authorities say they are cracking down on corruption within the army. The government has blamed most of the killings in eastern DRC on fighters of the Allied Democratic Forces and vowed to defeat them. The clashes have forced thousands of people to flee to neighboring countries.
The report about the killing of civilians in eastern DRC comes 3 days after a militia group attacked and overran 5 villages in North Kivu province. The DRC army says it has retaken control of all the villages captured by the rebels and has increased its presence to protect civilians in the region. Chris Sochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
Well, it's time now for us to take a short break. When we return, more in Africa Live, including we'll look at the impact of coal-fired power in South Africa and efforts to fight climate change. Welcome back. You're watching Africa Live. Well, phasing out fossil fuels is one of the key demands of this year's climate change conference. But this is a challenge for South Africa, the world's 7th largest producer and consumer of coal. In this installment of Panorama Africa, CGTN visits the country to explore the impact of coal-fired power and the potential of China-Africa cooperation in renewable energy.
Emissions from fossil fuels are the dominant cause of global warming. Phasing them out has become a global priority. In this episode of Panorama Africa, we're in one of the most fossil fuel dependent countries in the world, South Africa, where we take a look at the impact of the coal mining sector as the country's transition to renewable energy slowly gathers pace. Coal-fired electricity has lit up homes and powered the South African economy since the late 19th century. At the time, coal was plentiful and cheap. It has since become one of the most climate-costly energy sources yet, leaving a tainted legacy in its wake.
After they've extracted the coal, destroyed the environment, destroyed all our water sources, they disappeared. And here we are sitting with an environmental liability of which we pay with our health and our lives. The city of Emalahleni, meaning place of coal, is the heart of South Africa's coal mining sector. Situated in Mpumalanga province, it holds the largest concentration of coal mines and coal power plants in the country. Each year, new mines open up, bringing them closer and closer to where low-income communities live.
Sihlukumezeke kakhulu ngale mayini. Ayisalali nasebusuku imishini igijima waya. Idust yona ngisakhuluma ngayo ngoba sihlala phakathi kwayo. Every day uvuka kune dust. kusho ukuthi vele siphefumula yona, sidla yona, vele sesiphila yona. If ungacheka manje abantwana bethu, amehlo abo sewabovu kabuhlungu kwangathi abantu abadala ababhemayo abaphuzayo. Yaba affecta kakhulu lento le.
Of significance is the coal-related air pollution that is causing respiratory problems, including asthma in children.
Uqala kwa princess ukuze ngibone ukuthi bekane asthma. Waba ne-flu ngamisa esibhedlela akakhoni ukuphefumula kahle. Izinhliziyo zami ibuhlungu kakhulu ngoba angisiboni isidingo sawo la mama yini because asibenefit next kibo because abantwana bayagula izindlu ziyamosheka. So la mama yini shuthi lakithi alese just ukugula kuphela.
Local residents say they feel exploited at the expense of coal mining companies and the country's economy. Homes are easily damaged by the vibration of heavy machinery and blasting that accompanies coal mining. Homeowners have been left frustrated and desperate. In a cruel irony, the informal settlements that lie in the shadows of power stations do not have electricity. To cook food and warm their homes, many residents opt to dig for leftover inferior coal from the discarded mine dumps that sit above sinkholes. It's a risky undertaking.
And then murepa malatho go botlhoko ka re nthwela go phoshomela maphelo a batho a ya fela and le mo maoto re swile ka lebaka la re go tloga semoko se segolo ge le rwa yepa go tla malatlha mantši o fetsa go tsena go bala batho bantši.
The implementation of environmental regulations and the rehabilitation of coal fields has been inconsistent, causing many serious problems to the ecosystem. The consequences are being felt years later, even where mines have long closed.
This sinkhole is plus minus 30 meters deep. It is very dangerous because in some instances there are people who died because of these sinkholes. They are very deep, and where we are, it's informal, there's no electricity, at night it's very dark. Anything can happen.
The water system has also been affected by the old coal mining sites. Matthews has lived in Mpumalanga most of his life and has seen the lingering damage of this industry.
We are standing just in front of evaporation ponds. We call them acid mine drainage evaporation ponds from the old mine shafts, coal mine shafts. It contains heavy metals, dissolved heavy metals, such as zinc, such as copper, aluminum, and so forth. But what is worse, this water is untreated. It flows into the river untreated and mixes with the water in the river and consumed by community members down the stream.
Coal mining in Emalahleni started in 1896. Over a century later, the effects are still being felt by communities in the soil they live on, the water they drink, and the air they breathe.
The coal mining industry is not sustainable at all. It's about time that South Africans wake up and we need to smell the coffee and say alternatives, renewable energy, wind turbines, solar panels, agroecology must be key.
South Africa is the world's 7th largest producer and consumer of coal in the world, yielding an average of 224 million tons of coal each year. The country exports roughly 28% of this, but the majority, 72%, is sold domestically, firing up the power stations of the state-owned electricity provider, Eskom. Africa's biggest carbon emitter of greenhouse gases is feeling the pressure to retire its aging fleet of coal-fired power stations and cease investments in new coal projects. An announcement earlier this year from Chinese President Xi Jinping may help propel South Africa's efforts.
China will step up support for other developing countries in developing green and low-carbon energy and will not build new coal-fired power projects abroad.
According to the CEO of Eskom, the announcement is in line with the state power utility's own shifting objectives.
We cannot disguise the fact that Eskom is in fact a very large emitter not only of carbon but also of sulfur dioxide, nitrous oxide, as well as particulate matter. And we therefore have a duty to clean up the environment. The best way to protect the health and also to create future job opportunities and stimulate the economic environment in Mpumalanga is precisely to engender this just energy transition.
South Africa's just transition includes decommissioning coal mines, creating new jobs for mine workers, investing in renewable energy, and ultimately achieving a net zero emissions target by 2050. In South Africa's Western Cape province, a unique partnership between South African firm BTE Renewables and Chinese firm Goldwinds highlights the potential of China-Africa cooperation in the renewable energy sector. Barely a year old, the Excelsior wind farm in Swellendam is contributing clean energy directly into Eskom's national grid.
2020 December, we begin to production. We calculate we have benefit around 20,000 families per year. So that is very promising.
The Excelsior wind farm hopes to be a positive addition to this community, providing power as well as jobs and social development.
Goldwind, they have a policy that they only want people from the community, the local communities. They supply the jobs and then I can sort my family out, I can provide for my family.
This is a rural school and most of the kids come from farms around the school, and the parents and all the kids fall under low economic circumstances. They live with the basics. When BTE and Goldwin invest in our school, we will be able to get our learners to universities and to higher education institutions. And I think it will also have a great impact on our community.
True to China's own climate agenda, companies like Goldwinds serve as catalysts to Africa's green transition.
We always focus on the clean energy, and our main goals is from China and benefit the world. We do a lot of projects all over the world, and we are willing to helping the countries who focus on the clean energy.
For South Africa, breaking the coal dependency cycle is crucial for the climate and the health of communities.
We now have a very special video to share with you.
At this year's COP26 summit, the country's president announced an $8.5 billion deal to help end its reliance on coal and meet its 2050 climate pledge.
Bold action must start with accelerated decarbonization of our energy systems. This involves harnessing new technologies to reduce our dependence on high-emission fossil fuels, including unabated coal power.
By 2050, we will have between 78 and 85% renewable energy sources installed, some limited natural gas. There could be some legacy coal in that mix, but our forecasts are for a massive migration to renewable energy sources.
Coal has been a critical commodity in Africa, but its benefits are far outweighed by the cost to the environment and communities. But through key partnerships and with the abundant supply of wind and sun, Africa is uniquely positioned to transition to renewable energy, bringing power and progress to Africa for a clean and resilient future. Lindy Mtongana, CGTN, South Africa.
It's time now for a short break and return. Your business news, including Uganda fish exporters lose over $6 million as stocks steadily decline.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climate and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Juba,
Johannesburg,
Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
It's time now for us to delve into the days of business news. We begin in Uganda, where fish exporters and processors there are worried that they could soon run out of business because of dwindling fish stocks. Data from the Bank of Uganda shows that the value of fish exports dropped by over 37% from $10.6 million in January to $6.6 million in July this year. The decline shows no signs of abating. CGTN's Hilaria Yesiga explores why.
It's not business as usual at this factory in Entebbe. Fish processors say they are operating below previous levels.
You'd be having all morning and most of the afternoon trucks coming to offload fish. You'd have at least 25 tons of fish offloaded, put in ice. The capacity of this factory is to produce more than 50 tons of ice every day. So we calculate for every kilo of fish, you need about 2 kilos of ice. You'd see very many employees compared to what we have now.
From 5 days a week, the factory now operates 3 days a week. On a busy day, this factory would process about 50 tons of fish per day, but this has reduced drastically to 10 tons per day, something that is worrying fish exporters. Fish processors say illegal fishing methods are denying them enough raw material to process. Most of the Nile perch fish is harvested as immature fish illegally, and it never reaches the factory. The fish is then sold to illegal markets, more specifically to the Democratic Republic of Congo, leaving the factories with nothing to process. The fish processors are now worried that could force them to close.
We have fixed costs that are very high, so it obviously affects enormously our profits. And the risk is, of course, if you go into sustained losses, you may end up by just stopping your operations.
But local authorities say they won't let this happen.
We are going to fight this, and we're not going to sleep, we're not going to sit. This must stop. We need proteins in our country. We need the products of fish. We need to help our country to put value addition to the fish.
Fish exports are among Uganda's top foreign exchange earners. The government has now beefed up the fish protection unit with more personnel working to stop illegal fishing. And as the government casts the net wide to increase the stock in Lake Victoria, exporters like Borel are hopeful that they will get enough perch to keep in business. Hilaria Yesiga, CGTN, Entebbe, Central Uganda.
Well, over in Nigeria, the value of investments there announced in the third quarter of 2021 has risen by 130% year on year. That's according to data from the Nigeria Investment Promotion Commission. CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam takes us through the data.
Things are looking up for Nigeria as investment announcements hit $8.99 billion in Q3 of this year, an increase of 130% from the $3.95 billion recorded in the corresponding period of 2020.
It's not as such, because whatever percentage they're using to measure this was compared with a particular year where nobody worked. If we take the investment of foreign direct investment into Nigeria today, or foreign portfolio investment into Nigeria today, we won't say we have done well.
So that is to be expected, which is arising from the fact that the economy is fully recovering. And there are many areas where we're actually doing better than than before COVID. For example, the transportation that was so badly hit last year has jumped up to over to a 64% increase in activity. The aviation is fully recovered. The industries are picking up. They are all going into positive territory. So there are a lot of investments that are coming into the country right now.
As elsewhere in the world, Nigeria recorded low investment announcements in 2020, $16.74 billion. There was a 44% drop from the $29.91 billion tracked in 2019.
Nigerians expect more in investment. If we didn't have all the vices we have today, the insecurity, the level of corruption that exists today, we would obviously have had good investment and more investment today in the economy.
About 47% of the investment announcements were domestic. Others came in from South Korea, South Africa, and Spain.
Investor confidence is very, very critical because insecurity and many things going on in the country send the wrong signal to investors. So when you begin to see enthusiasm of this nature that are demonstrating more confidence, growing confidence of investors, it then means that we're going to have more dollars enter into our foreign reserves, and that will temper the rates of forex.
Sectors that gain the most traction are manufacturing, electricity and gas, information and communications, as well as transportation. With the kickoff of the African Continental Free Trade Area, experts believe that Nigeria could once again emerge as a favorite investment destination, and that will provide employment opportunities, reduce poverty, and boost the nation's GDP. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Well, South Africa's new finance minister is expected to deliver the country's proposed spending plans for the next 3 years later on today. That's November the 11th. The medium-term budget policy statement details the country's revenue and spending targets over that time frame. Despite the devastation caused by COVID, South Africa has a better-than-expected revenue base to work with. CGTN's Sumitra Naidu explores what to expect from this budget speech.
The last 2 years have been particularly hard due to COVID. More so because the South African economy was already struggling before the infections began. Interestingly, for the first time in a while, South Africa is sitting with higher revenues.
We had very good collections in the commodity markets. Commodity companies have done exceptionally well and are paying good taxes. So they've collected far more than they thought they would.
But the commodities rebound may be short-lived. The new minister, Enoch Godongwana, still needs to concentrate on balancing the books.
We're actually sitting with a situation where mining taxes are supposedly about 25% of corporate income taxes. So we have been gifted this commodity price windfall. I think expectations are very high of Minister Enoch Godongwana to see what will that windfall actually be spent on, or will some of that actually reticulate into fiscal savings this year.
So even though the minister has more revenues to work with, there's still a major concern about the country's high debt situation and the cost of servicing that debt. Another major concern is the public sector wage bill.
Over 20% of tax revenues goes towards servicing debt. The public sector wage bill also eats into revenues. Many are wondering whether the minister will continue the path to fiscal consolidation or start spending again to lift the economy and create jobs.
Where we are quite concerned is again around the wage bill and if there are any permanent forms of expenditure, such as a basic income grant, which is also being bandied about at the moment. We are still dealing with quite a significant debt burden if we look at it in rand terms. And of course, servicing that debt burden becomes quite expensive.
And we can't grow without electricity. We can't grow without power. And, we're back in stage 4. So the government's got lots of issues. And it's, I think the message through to them from the election is just start doing what you were appointed to do. Start doing it. Start taking your job seriously.
A real baptism of fire for the new minister as he tries to steady the ship. The ratings agencies will also be watching closely for news on structural reforms and plans to address the electricity crisis. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Well, Tanzania's central bank has been taking a range of measures to stabilize the banking industry, including merging small banks which have inadequate capital bases. The ratio of non-performing loans as a percentage of total private sector debt in Tanzania stood at 9.4% in March. While that's over 100 basis points lower on a year-on-year basis, it's still nearly twice the BOT's target of 5%. The Bank of Tanzania said that its investigations found that employees of some banks and financial institutions were directly responsible for issuing loans without following procedures, fraud, or other practices that are tantamount to lack of integrity. It said, among other measures, commercial banks would be required to take legal action against such employees, and the regulator would blacklist and prevent them from working anywhere in the financial sector in Tanzania. Well, let's not turn to Beijing, where the Communist Party of China has passed a landmark resolution on the history and major achievements of the CPC. It highlights the key events in the CPC's 100-year history and also looks to reinforce unity among the party. The resolution was adopted at the 6th plenary session. The session also passed a resolution on the convening of the 20th National Congress of the CPC. It is set to take place in Beijing during the second half of 2022. Let's now take a short break. Sport news coming up, including Kenya arrive in Kampala ahead of the 2022 FIFA World Cup qualifier match against Uganda.
It's new, it's different, it's a challenge. My biggest fear is simple, it's not making it up there. Another 30 years, maybe another century, and all of that might be gone.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Now for the latest sport update, Africa FIFA World Cup qualifiers for Qatar 2022 resume today with 10 groups scheduled to be in action in the next few days. Kenya's Harambee Stars touched down in Kampala on Wednesday for a mouth-watering tie against host Uganda, who are second in Group E. The Uganda Cranes have to beat Kenya's Harambee Stars to stand a chance to proceed to the final round of qualifiers. Kenya, who are third in the group, are out of contention, but Captain Michael Lunga says their pride is still at stake ahead of the Eastern African Derby and promises to give Uganda a tough evening at the St. Mary's Stadium in Kitende.
Of course, we don't have a chance to qualify, but we have our pride to protect. It's going to be East African Derby, and always a derby is a derby, you know, so we want to go out there, you know, and represent and try to make amends. Of course, our two previous outings against Mali. Against Uganda, we are going to give it our level best and try to work hard, you know, to make Kenyans proud once again.
Other fixtures on the continent will see Ethiopia take on Ghana, while South Africa host Zimbabwe in a hotly contested Group G. Namibia is to face Congo, while Togo take on Group H winners Senegal. Group J, which is still open for all four teams, will see leaders Tanzania host DR Congo, while Madagascar travel to Benin. Meanwhile, news just coming in. Kenya's Sports Cabinet Secretary Amina Mohamed has disbanded Football Kenya Federation to pave way for investigations following allegations of gross financial impropriety. The CS, who had on Thursday morning received the audit report on FKF from Sports Registrar, acted swiftly, naming a 15-member caretaker committee to run football for the next 6 months. The report also calls for a special audit of the accounts of FKF and subsequent future audits. Well, over in Tunisia, Espérance Sportive de Tunis secured their second win in a row at the Men's Club African Volleyball Championship in April. However, the Blood and Gold team has been excluded from the 2022 FIVB Volleyball Men's World Championship. Espérance and the Tunisian Volleyball Federation had denounced this exclusion as a form of racism. CGTN's Adnan Chouachi has the details.
Espérance Sportive de Tunis has decried the decision of the International Volleyball Federation. The Blood and Gold team has also rejected all forms of exclusion against the winners of the African Volleyball Championship.
The players are demoralized and disappointed. We were certain of playing at the Volleyball Men's World Championship. Volleyball's international governing bodies have no credibility. What's the objective behind playing any future tournaments? We're losing money without any motivation. The International Volleyball Federation wants to divide the globe. It is global segregation. It's the Volleyball Federation of the 4 continents and not the world.
Espérance staff and technical team has said that the evaluation of African clubs by the International Federation is not objective. EST's assistant coach accused global decision makers in volleyball of apartheid in sports.
Africa's representative must take part in the World Tournament because Esperance is technically among the best teams. We believe in equity in sports. We are experiencing a form of sports apartheid. It's illegal and goes against the noble values and the spirit of sports.
9 players from Espérance took part in the 2020 Summer Olympics. Tunisia, winner of the African Volleyball Nations Championship in Kigali in September, rose to 14th place in the ranking of the International Federation of Volleyball and retained its leadership in Africa and the Arab world.
We are shocked for being excluded from the World Championship. EST is proud of representing Africa. The volleyball level in this continent is not as weak as the International Federation claims. Esperance can play in any international tournament and it deserves an official invitation. From now on, it's useless to win continental titles if we don't play for the world title.
This discrimination against African teams is unfortunate and unacceptable. Esperance recruited new players, won the African title, and showed a good performance at the Olympic Games. Nothing can explain this racism.
According to the International Volleyball Federation, the 2022 FIVB Volleyball Men's World Championship featured 24 teams. 2 places were allocated to the host, Russia, and the current title holder, Poland. 10 places are allocated to the top 2 teams from each of the 2021 continental championships that have not yet qualified as host or title holder. Remaining places are allocated to the top 12 teams in the FIVB World Ranking that have not yet qualified through the first 3 criteria. The Tunisian Volleyball Federation has announced its support to Espérance Sportive de Tunis following its exclusion from the 2022 World Championship. Tunisian fans say Africa deserves to have a representative in this international tournament. Adnan Chouachi, CGTN.